the school committee and your moderator for this evening's discussion. I'd like to explain a little bit. This event was developed as a result of a meeting between Superintendent Schaefer, Heidi Hernandez, representing a group of parents, and myself, representing the members of the school committee. It's our hope that at the conclusion of this evening, you will have found the answers to your safety questions, will understand the safety procedures in place in our schools, and you may pick up some tips about how to discuss these safety issues with your children. Our panel this evening was intended to include Peter Schaefer, our superintendent of schools, who is up here, David Majensky, chief of police, and Kathleen Posk, who is a school psychologist. However, she came down with food poisoning today. She was going to try to make it, but she has not arrived as yet, so I'm assuming that she's probably not going to make it here. Each of our panel members will make a short presentation. At the conclusion of both of their presentations, we will open up the meeting for a question and answer period, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how that will proceed when we get to that point. So I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Schaefer.
Thank you very much. I don't know if people can hear me okay. If not, just please let me know. I want to start by thanking people for coming tonight. I want to thank the chief for coming tonight. I want to thank Kathy for helping facilitate, and I want to thank Heidi Hernandez for helping coordinate and getting us kicked off. So what I need to share with you and start with my own personal opinion, and that is that we are never going to be completely safe. And it's my belief in that, I hope, that keeps us as safe as we can be, because we need to continue to be vigilant about being safe. It's that motivates me to continue to always look to find ways to be more and more safe. And in doing those things that are going to keep us as safe as we can be, and the safest that we can be, I hope that we draw comfort and assurance that those things are in place to help create the safest environment possible. So there are multiple components to this, though. There isn't any one solution, and there isn't any one solution that ought not continually be reviewed and thought about. So a lot of work has already gone into safety plans. A lot of work continues to go into safety plans. A lot of work goes into reviewing them. And then going forward, I'm going to talk about some of those things tonight. But one of the most important pieces is communication with the police department. And I can tell you that we have that communication that's critical, that communication, that follow-up, communication follow-up, and communication follow-up. That's in place, and I want to give the chief credit and his department credit for that, because those things are occurring. And those continue to improve. Just recently, we signed a new memorandum of understanding with the police department that helps provide more easy access between our two departments. We don't want things to be siloed the way you hear in different agencies where there's a lack of communication. The SRO program has helped us with that. That provides the armed police presence in our school buildings, which, by the way, the police department wrote that grant. And I want to thank the police department and the chief for that. That helps keep us safer. But also there's an oversight piece. In recent weeks, month or so, the checking of doors, the checking our protocols in terms of students' entrance to school and things like that, suggestions are made to us, and we follow up on them as a school department. And the police department has been helping to provide that consultation piece, which I appreciate. It could be a Thursday night at 9 o'clock, and I'm fortunate that I could be on the phone back and forth with the chief of police talking about school safety issues, or on a Saturday or on a snow day is something that comes to mind, because the communication works that well and the follow-up works that well. For example, it's not just about having someone who's in the building doing harm to us, or that horrific type of experience that we see over and over again play out on TV. It could have been any one of the last couple of storms where a tree was down, and the Abington Police Department was racing ahead of the DPW, and the DPW was chainsawing trees, clearing streets so that our buses could get home, so kids didn't have to walk home any greater distance than they already do during a weather event. And so this umbrella of communication is certainly, tonight I know we're talking about an active shooter, but it's about all aspects of school safety. And I should include the DPW and the fire department in that, because we have that network here in Abington. Just because they're not up here, because they're not the focus of tonight's discussion, that doesn't mean that we don't also have those good communications with them to help keep people safe. That's just one component, and the chief is here to get into that more specifically. Another component is our mental health professionals. Kathleen's not here to talk to you, and she was asked originally to come here tonight to talk about how do you talk to our children about these things. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the work that our mental health professionals do with the identification of needs through support teams in our building, and then the support of those needs of our kids. We work very hard to create a culture throughout the Abington Public Schools where we don't have students feeling isolated or alone. That's not to say that on any given day those people don't exist, that doesn't occur. It absolutely does. And if we didn't think it did, then we'd be fools. But they work very hard around making sure that we integrate as much as we can with our entire student population so people feel comfortable. There are any number of other programs that take place that are proactive to that regard. I mean, in this room just last week, we had the Assistant District Attorney talking to all of our students, grades 5 through 12, about the dangers of the internet, including cyberbullying. I was here for the middle school, for part of the middle school presentation. It was age appropriate and it was perfect, and it was brought to us through the police department. And I want to thank them for giving us that. So it's not just about reacting. It also needs to be about being proactive and creating those environments that are mentally healthy and nurturing and help our students feel supported. Again, I apologize that Kathleen wasn't here for this. She'd be able to answer your questions on that better than I could. So there are daily and weekly meetings between the police department and the school department. We currently have a plan in place that you would call a traditional lockdown. And I can answer some questions about that later if people like, but I think you can imagine what lockdown is. The doors are locked and you hide. And that is what 75% of America's schools currently have in place. I don't want to be the 75th percentile for school safety. I want us to be in the 99th, 100th percentile for school safety. And so what we are doing, and we've practiced this lockdown drill with the police department, what I'm going to be doing tomorrow night is asking the school committee for approval for 2 additional half-days so that we can implement something called ALICE. This is something we need to do in conjunction with the police department. ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. What it does is it gives people more training and gives them and equips them with choices during what could be a tragic incident or event, so that they have more ownership and they're more empowered to make different choices rather than just hiding in a locked room. The pervasive feeling was that if you wait in a locked room, emergency responders will come and save you. This provides that, plus other options for people, including evacuating, how to evacuate, how to counter, barricade, things like that. And again, I can't answer why only 25% of our schools in this country have switched to the ALICE training, but you would ask me then, perhaps, why are you switching to ALICE training if most people aren't doing it? And that's because it is the recommendation from most of the safety task forces and emergency response associations for this type of event. 50% of these events in America take place in businesses. 20 to 25% take place in schools. The thinking is that if we can train our children this universal response to what could be an active shooter. This is something that they will be able to use the way that they understand how to stop, drop, and roll, or how to behave in a fire, how to evacuate. These are unfortunately things that there's a transference universally for these types of trainings. This year would also include, though, a parent night. We'll have another night on Alice for people, and then we'll do work during the school day to train all of our students before the end of this school year. We wouldn't be able to do this without the cooperation of the police department and the fire department, because it involves rewriting our emergency operating procedures, which we're in the process of doing. I started this by saying that we've got things in place, we review them, we continue to evolve, and that should never end. We need to continually be about that so we can provide the safest environment possible. But this training of our students includes the 2 half-days for our staff, because there's an online learning component, then there's an instructional component, then there's a drill component for our staff. Then again, we want to do that parent night, and then we also want to do the training effectively with all of our students. Just so that you would know, it would be age appropriate, at a higher level of sophistication likely with our high school students, and then we will be very careful and thoughtful about how we implement this all the way down to the kindergarten pre-K levels. Because language, how it's presented, how we discuss these things is we need to be very sensitive to. I think I'm going to turn it over to the Chief.
Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate that. Good evening, everyone, and I'm happy that you came tonight, and certainly feel free to move up if you so feel inclined, and later on down the line, I'm open to any questions along with the Superintendent. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I might be a little bit longer than the Superintendent before we get into the question and answering. There were a couple issues that were brought up at the last, I think it was the last meeting of the school committee, which I was not in attendance. A couple of things I wanted to stress. First and foremost, the police department and members of the departments.
Beg your pardon, I'm sorry. One thing I want to know, I want to make it clear that the Chief was not formally invited to that meeting, and I should have opened with that. So I apologize for interrupting.
No worries. It's all good, Superintendent. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that, and stress to the members of this community that this police department, we're all committed to keeping your school safe. I grew up in this town. I went to this school system. I am a product of this school system, and believe me, there's no one who is a stronger advocate of keeping our schools safe than myself. I think there was a time when I see Coach Kelleher out there when I was under his tutelage years ago. But even at the cost of their own lives, officers, men and ladies that work for this department are committed to keeping your kids safe at any cost, and certainly at the cost of their own life, if need be. They're not trained to wait. They're trained to come directly in and address any active shooter or whether it be in a school or any other area. We train pretty heavily on that. So at the last meeting of the school committee, Superintendent Schaefer, I thought, did an excellent job identifying some general measures regarding safety. And it's understandable that some of the questions he couldn't answer. Some of the questions are really not in his purview. They're really in my purview. And some of the people that were asking the questions, I think the police professionals that were asking the questions should have understood that. And certainly anybody here, my door is open. I think I said to a couple of people when I originally came in, when I originally walked into place, is that, my door is open. We're still a small town. I grew up in the town. You can still come in my office at any given point, knock on my door, and ask questions or make suggestions. I'm all ears. If there's a better practice, I'm all for it, if it makes sense. The first thing I wanted to just kind of bring up was that, as far as, and the superintendent touched bases on it, as far as not attending. Monday after the incident in Florida, members of my staff, myself, the superintendent, the town manager, and the assistant town manager all met in my office. And we had a frank and open discussion regarding the security measures that were in place. We were very much in tune with it, and we looked at everything that we were doing and anything we should be doing or anything we should be changing. I mean, that was right after. We immediately got together. Like the superintendent had said, there isn't a day that goes by that I probably don't speak or talk about a school issue in my office if I'm not talking directly with the superintendent or one of his staff members. So we left the meeting with the, feeling that we were doing the best practices at the time. We certainly talked about increasing police presence right after the Parkland shooting, but we wanted to take a look and really dive into what we think we could be doing better. We walked away. We felt pretty comfortable what we were doing. We made some suggestions on some improvements and some thoughts back and forth. Again, it's all about communication. The next day, on Tuesday, I met again with the superintendent this time and his staff, along with my staff and some of my command staff and some of my officers that are trained in ALICE. So his ALICE trainers, my ALICE trainers met about implementing the program. And we discussed to try to do it as quickly as we could, as safely as we could, without jeopardizing the safety of the overall school system or school district. We also reviewed, and in the past we've done a complete review I think it was in 2014, a multi-hazard review of our response plan. So we talked about all those different things. Well, I don't want to talk about the specifics of what we made in a suggestion back in 2014. I can tell you 99%, if not 100%, of the suggestions that we made back in 2014, after reading the studies that were done, this school department district adopted. So we're pretty much on target with everything that I've read on what to do and the best practices. At the end of the meeting, it was mentioned about the school committee meeting that night. I had some prior commitments, or a member of my staff. I think at that point, I didn't really think much of it, to be honest with you, because I think we had gone through everything. We were pretty comfortable with what we did and what we were doing, and I declined on that meeting. So then moving on to the meeting itself, some of the questions about the SRO position and questions. With my commitment with regards to a school resource officer, I can tell you, if you go back in time, 14 years ago when I became chief in 2004, the first town report I wrote, and it's there, is I mentioned the importance of a school resource officer. I know the value of a school resource officer. I know the value of the position. I'm very much in tune with it. When I became chief in 2004, that was the most important thing that I thought we needed to do. So much so that in 2006, I wrote my first grant for school resource officer and received it. Different superintendent, different time, different school committee, different circumstances. At that point, it wasn't accepted. The school superintendent at that point, who was different than the current one we have, I think less progressive, to be honest with you, declined. So we didn't get our position. That was 100% paid for back in 2006. From 2006 on till 2015, I continued writing grants. We were unsuccessful until 2015, where we were successful. My lieutenant, Kevin Sullivan, and myself wrote the grant, and we were able to obtain a 3-year grant at 75% paid for. Benefits, overtime, other things are paid by the town. And as the years go, we have to pay more. So currently it's about 50% of the grant we're paying for. The grant expires in 2018 of August. But any unused money, I'll certainly go forward and ask for an extension, and there's no reason why I won't get an extension to fulfill the full obligation of the grant and expend all the monies that we received. If it wasn't for the police department and the members of the police department, we wouldn't have school resource officers. So believe me, I'm committed to school resource officers. Officers work outside the normal hours. School resource officers, it isn't just what you see, it's the follow-up that you don't see. It's the kids that are having issues and we make home visits. It's the conversations that take place at 10 o'clock at night with the superintendent or members of my department. I can tell you as recently as last week we had an incident that took place all night, and by the next morning we were well in hand, and the superintendent and I had a conversation. I think it was about 6:30 in the morning, and we already had everything in place. He had his team of mental health providers in place, and it was seamless to everybody on the outside. But there was a lot of work done during the nighttime hours by my officers, my school resource officers, to make that happen. The school resource officer, as far as, and these are some of the points that were brought up, I think, that the superintendent was unable to answer. So I'll go through kind of each one of them as I kind of saw them, and I certainly will be open to questions later. We originally had the 2 full-time school resource officers, and that exceeds the grant guidelines. I do not have to have school resource officers here 100% of the time. That is not part of the guidelines of the school resource officer grant. At that point, we had 2, so we were beyond the scope of the original grant. 1 transferred to another department, and so we started to fill that position. We trained several other officers, but another officer told me that he had a desire to go to a different department. He was going to transfer. He ultimately did transfer to another department. He was trained, but it made no sense to, while somebody's trying to leave the town of Abington, to train them and put them in with your children, only to have them go partway through the year. So ultimately, he wasn't put in, even though he was trained. So we took the second officer. We trained again. We had a school resource officer to fill the position. And currently, he's full-time. He's still in that position. So we had, again, we had 2 full-time school resource officers outlining in exceeding what the grant guidelines were, which was 75%. But the second officer we had at that point, school resource officer, unbeknownst to me, took the state police exam and ultimately transferred to the state police. Never really gave me a heads up on they were going to go, to be honest with you. I think they were in between whether or not they were going to go. So ultimately, they left, and once again, we didn't have a second school resource officer. Currently, I have 6 officers in the police academy. I have 7 officers that have under a year on. We're not a big department, and it would be unwise, and really it would be to put them into a school resource officer position. They're learning the job themselves. They've come through the academy, now they're in the process of learning. I have other officers. We have another state police exam coming up. Other officers are looking to possibly join the state police ranks. And again, I wish them luck, but it's an issue for the town and for the departments who is already understaffed. 3 officers took the civil service exam. They rank high on the exam. They might be leaving. It's of their choice again. So with that in mind, the court prosecutor stepped up. He went to the training. He came up. He had the most experience. He did the training. And not only did he take on the duties of a court prosecutor, but he also took on the duties of the SRO. So typically he'd get done at about 12 o'clock, and then he would take on as much role of a school resource officer as he could. He would also work into the night. He was the guy that did the background. He was the guy that did the follow-up when everybody went home. He was the guy at 11 o'clock in the night that would come out and follow up on stuff. Again, these are all within the grant guidelines, perfectly within the grant guidelines. Again, the town's paying a substantial proportion at this point of the grant. So to me, this officer should be commended. He stepped up. He gets the job done. And not only some of the programs that the superintendent mentioned, the district attorney's office, getting him in, the different members for the district attorney's office. It's his contact with the school, with the district attorney's office that gets him, because he's over in the courts, that gets us access to these things. It's his contact, and it's a perfect fit that gets us, when we have a Snapchat issue, that we get a warrant as quickly as we can, right through the district attorney's office. It's a perfect fit. The officer does a wonderful job. He steps up and he takes on additional responsibilities at the expense of his own time and his own family. I know he's working countless hours. Most districts our size have one school resource officer. We have two. And I think that's a point lost in many people. Most districts have one, our size, we have two. Somebody mentioned earlier that they thought it would be great if we had a school resource officer in every school. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a funding issue. It's an issue that certainly you should take up with your local people. If you want to put a school resource officer in every school, I'm all for it. I am 100% for it. Every school should have a school resource officer to call their own. I believe in that. It's a funding issue. So as far as safety thoughts, moving forward, just realize that school resource officers are so important to me. I haven't had a detective unit in 10 years, but we have school resource officers. That's how important school resource officers and your children are to me. Safety starts at home. When we talk about safety, communication, it starts with you parents and you parents being here, and I applaud you for that. And I'll give you an example. Last week, again, we had an issue with a student that was brought to me from a parent. That parent contacted the school department, I think the principal here in the high school, and also contacted the police department. That started a whole investigation. They saw something on their kid's Snapchat or their kid's Facebook or their kid's whatever it was that alarmed them. They immediately told us. It starts at home. It starts with everybody here. There is no one solution, as the superintendent said. Long before the tragic events of Parkland, we've had a proactive school approach. Like I said, the superintendent and I work hand in hand on a weekly, if not daily basis. We communicate all the time. We have had weekly meetings. For the last 3 years, we meet once a week. The assistant superintendent of the school system, my deputy chief, my lieutenant, my school resource officers, the superintendent, and myself meet on a weekly basis to discuss everything going on. Our officers walk through the schools. They familiarize themselves with this school. They walk through, they understand every area, or at least they're working to understand every area. It's a pretty complicated school system. So they take a pretty proactive approach. More importantly, they talk with the students. They talk with the teachers. They get valuable information. Each officer, each cruiser has a laptop, and in that cruiser there's a layout of the school system here. So in the event that there was something that happened, that we had another agency come and try to help us, they would have easy access to the layout. That's a credit to the school superintendent, who gave us immediately, right when this building was built, and as the building was being built, the layout, day by day, of how the school was laid out. Because if somebody comes from Rockland or the state police or any other agency to help us, they're not going to know the layout of our school. But they would with us, because we have the layout of the school system right in our cruisers. We meet weekly with the crisis response team. I think that's a big issue. We meet monthly with the district units. We've even met with student groups as recently as the silent protest. We were involved in that. We were involved in the planning. We were involved in the process. We were involved in making sure that everything was kept safe. Years and years ago, we started a handle with care unit. The superintendent and I went to a meeting. I think it was the Plymouth County District Attorney's Office. I think it was 4 years ago. There was a system in place that was being used in Virginia. It's called Handled with Care. And what it is, if a child is having a difficult time and we come across them as a police officer, we send nothing more than HWC, which means Handled with Care, in the child's name. No information, nothing about what happened, but just a heads up that the child might be having a hard time, in case they might need additional resources or a pat on the back. The superintendent had mentioned we actively share information on our memorandum of understanding. This memorandum of understanding gives us wide discretion. It was written by the town. Town manager allowed us to get access to the attorney, the town attorneys. They had a look at it. We pushed it as far as we humanly could on sharing information to protect the children and protect your children here in the school district. It's a legal document. It gives us a lot of the ability to communicate and talk about kids that we think may be having a hard time. It's all about safety. We've had the district attorney's office in. We've run Dare Camp. We started up Dare Camp again, which we hadn't done in years. I think the superintendent mentioned sexting. Again, that's through the school resource officer, who also was a court prosecutor. He has great contacts and he uses them. Another thing that was brought up, I'll switch over to training. The entire department of the Abington Police Department is tactically sound. We have a much safer approach than just SROs. SROs are important, don't get me wrong. School resource officers are important, but we train everyone. The entire department, not just the SROs. They're trained to go directly to the shooter, directly to the threat and eliminate it. They're trained not to wait. They're trained to go in. And just a quick note on some of the training that we've done. I'll go back 8 years. This is on top of qualifications. Most departments qualify. We qualify. Most departments qualify 1 time a year. We tried 3 times a year. But on top of that, for the last 8 years, I just want to outline some of the training that anybody that might have had issues or questions about some of the training that we do here in Abington. 2010, we had a rapid response to active shooter training, the entire department. That was in 2010. 2013, scenario-based firearms training. That's basically live fire. We bring a trailer into the department. You'll see it parked next to the department. They shoot live rounds at scenarios of hostage situations, shoot, don't shoot situations, and it's cutting-edge training. 2013, we had active shooter response training conducted at the Abington High School, not this high school, the high school prior. 2013, we had bomb threat response training at the Abington High School, the entire department. 2013, we had an active shooter using simunitions up at the high school. So we actively, not only did we train, but we used simunitions, which are, it's like paintball, but not paintball. They're pellets. We'll do live shooting scenarios and train. It's about as live as you can get, and it's about as cutting edge as you can get. 2013, we did low-light scenario-based firearms training. That means 2/3 of our department, if you think about it, work nights, either 4 to 12 or midnight to 8, or even the day shift for that matter. If you go into a basement at nighttime or in a garage at nighttime, we train to shoot not only during the day when you can see the target, but using ballistic, shields. We do that shield training, but also flashlights so we can see, and low-light training. 2013, we went to a Creating Safe Schools seminar in Bridgewater State University and went to that. It was put on by the United States Secret Service. 2014, bomb threat response training. 2014, active shooter training at the Abington High School. 2015, active shooter training at the schools with a complete policy review. We went through our policy. We went through with the policy of the school, of our response, and trained. 2015, scenario-based training. Again, we brought in the trailer, and we did, this time, different scenarios based shoot, don't shoot training with live ammunition. 2015, officers were sent to the New England School of Safety Conference. We thought it's so important. It revolved around discussions around the Virginia Virginia Tech tragedy, and bomb threat response. In 2017, again, we did scenario-based training. In 2017, we did tabletop active shooter training. We actually hired an outside consultant to come in and do active tabletop exercises of a shooter scenario here in town. 2017, we had a staff meeting to discuss the tabletop scenario of an active shooter in one of our school buildings. In 2018, we did ballistic shield training using simunitions. We did ballistic shield training at the Frollo School. Ballistic shields are just what you would think, ballistic shields that would protect the officer in the event that they had to move in or had to protect people leaving. Your students leaving, protect maybe emergency personnel coming in, and protect people coming out, victims. And upcoming in 2018, we have active shooter training using simunitions and patrol rifles. We're going to do that here at the high school during April vacation. So that anyone that might question what we do for training, that's only going back 8 years. I just want to make sure that everyone understands and feels comfortable that your police department actively trains, and we do cutting-edge training. I take it very serious, and I'd like to think that we do it at least as good, if not better than most. We also discuss, because of recent incidents and studies that we saw, we've done safety equipment. We've revamped our safety equipment. We did it years ago to include tourniquets, so that, in these mass shooting events, we didn't want, kids a lot of times in waiting for first responders or people bled out. So we trained our officers in how to apply and use and equip them on tourniquets. We're currently trying to find the funding to get more tourniquets so that officers keep them on them. Right now they have kits. They have kits with several tourniquets in them. Every cruiser has it. And we also are looking at mass casualty kits, which in the event that we needed to have multiple, which is a kit with multiple tourniquets or a multiple gauze, immediate stop bleeding. It's not only a tourniquet, but it's also gauze that you put into a wound to make it immediately clot so that people didn't bleed out while waiting for people. We have daily roll calls discussions. We meet. It's incredibly valuable to do daily roll call meetings and discuss not only what's happening around the town, but discuss with our school resource officers to let them know, hey, Johnny Jones or Jane Jones, had an issue last night at home. Let's discuss it and make sure that they come into school. We locked up mom, or we locked up dad, or brother, or something happened, or somebody died, something tragic happened. To share that information, it's valuable. It's incredibly important. I don't think. I might be dating myself, but I think Hill Street Blues had it right way back when they used to do the old roll calls. We do that on a daily basis. We go back 24 hours every day, every shift at the beginning, and we discuss what happens. Another thing that was brought up, and don't mind me, Superintendent, a canine drug search. I just wanted to touch bases on that. I don't know, canine drug searches require extensive planning. We've done them. If properly executed, they require, at a school like this, it would require at least 30+ combined teachers, police officers, along with outside agencies. It is a slight deterrent, and I would say slight. But I think more importantly than that is officers walking through and being seen. That's more of a deterrent than canines. Because ultimately what happens with the canines is they give us a false sense of security. Because the canines go up, they check the hallways, they check the areas, they do not check the people, all right? They do not go up. You cannot, without reasonable suspicion, take a canine, nor would I, take a canine and put it up to a child. I would not do it. First of all, it's illegal. You cannot, without reasonable suspicion, you cannot take a canine and single out an individual to do that. It's wrong. And I think the ACLU, rightfully so, would have a field day with it. So I think it's one of those things, it has limited benefit. I think a bigger benefit is communication, like the superintendent said. I think K-9s have an intimidation factor. I think they're counterproductive. And I'm not opposed. If the school committee or the school department wants a K-9 search, we can do one. But I think to keep your children safe, the better way of doing it is to keep it up constant communication and to make sure that we all communicate. You as parents communicate to us when you see something, that you take that extra step to snoop into your kids' stuff. You're the parent. I snoop into my kids' stuff. My 14-year-old, I'll still check her accounts. It's not locked out. I still will walk in and say, I want to look at what you're looking at right now. That's the way it is. I'm the parent. I find nothing wrong with that. Everybody does it their own way. But that's my philosophy. And I think if you see something, to report it. The old adage, see something, say something, is absolutely true. So I'll get off my soapbox for a little bit here, but I just wanted to address some issues. And I'm certainly, please, don't be bashful. If you have a question, I'd love to answer it. And if you have a suggestion for how we do it better, even if you don't want to say it now, grab me later. Grab me after. Pick up the phone, call me. I'm easy enough to get a hold of. And again, we're a small town. I grew up in the town. I have family in this town. And I went to the school district. So I really do care. So that's it.
And I'd like to thank both Superintendent Schaefer and Chief Majensky for their words. We're going to be opening our question and answer session. I want to kind of go over the ground rules with everyone first. If you raise your hand, I'm going to bring the microphone to you so that everyone can hear your question. Before asking your question, please give your name and address so that we know who we're talking to. If questions become very repetitive, I may have to cut off the discussion on a particular topic so that every topic that people came to ask about can be handled. That doesn't mean that you won't get a chance to ask your question, because both of our panelists here today have agreed to stay later so people can ask any personal questions of them afterwards if they choose to. We just want to make sure that everyone leaves here feeling like they're taking something away of importance, that they've had their questions answered, and that you've had your chance to bring up any points that you've got to speak about. So, that said, does anyone have a question?
Is it on? Yeah. Oh. Hi, I'm Jane Coyle. I live at 154 Karen Lane. My question is I'm an advocate for all students, a very strong advocate for children with special needs. I would like to know if the Abington Police Department has any training with children with special needs. And if you do, is it done yearly? Or how often, I should say.
We are moving towards that. We are part of the One Mind program, if you're familiar with the One Mind, which is we are committed to the next 2 years to training. I want to say it's 75% of our departments with specialized trainings. One of the problems, that is absolutely right on the mark, one of the problems is the training available right now. It's cutting edge. What you're talking about is cutting edge. It shouldn't be, but it is cutting edge. So we are committed to that. We're committed to the One Mind. You can look that up if you get a chance, a program, and I think that's absolutely spot on, and hopefully we can fulfill our obligation to making sure that our officers are trained to deal with individuals with special needs.
Can I build on that?
Please.
So trying to just building on that for a second, in terms of the school department, obviously the teachers who are with our kids know them so very, very, very well in terms of disabilities, and I give our staff, our teachers, paraprofessionals, and administrators credit for how well they know our kids. I mean, we're small. We're fortunate. The benefit of being a small district is you're a small district, and we know each other so very well. We know their needs. On top of that, part of the ALICE training requires that people thrown into what could be a terrible situation, whether they have a disability or they don't have a disability, you can never predict how they're going to react in that situation. So part of the ALICE training includes helping people through that in the event of an active shooter. That's included in this training we're going to be working on. So.
If I could just piggyback on that one more thing. One of the things that I was talking with the town manager and we were talking about is I think it's incredibly important to have a mental health professional on hand. The schools have mental health professionals on hand during the school hours. I think that in order to be a progressive, I know some communities, very few are doing it, but it's the cutting edge, it's the way of the future, is to have on-call or on-staff mental health professionals that will follow up. We deal with things, the police department comes, we deal, we quell. Sometimes they get hospitalized, sometimes we can just quell. The school does their part. They help kids get through a school day, but there's nobody there after. And really, in order if we could have a mental health professional that would give people the ability to find a good family therapist, an individual therapist, resources that they might need. That is the cutting edge, and I think that is the way of the future. And I hope that Abington, you know, the leaders in Abington kind of listen to what I'm saying and address that, and maybe get us on staff, get us on hand with somebody that we can rely on after hours and pick up the phone and have them follow up after we follow up. It's something that is critical. It's something that is unique. It would be different, but I think it's so valuable. And not only for our residents, but also our own people. It would be incredibly important to have a mental health professional that we do have an employee assistance program, and that's good. And it's certainly, the town does a great job on it, but I think to have just that extra layer would be invaluable.
We have another question. I forgot my running shoes tonight.
First off, thank you very much for coming tonight. I feel a lot better. Just have a quick question. In Parkland, the shooter was, the police officer went to their house multiple times. Oh, sorry, Brian Franey, 13 Caitlin Drive. The shooter in Parkland was known by the police officers. I was wondering if you could touch briefly on like protocol. If there is a repeat offender, can we go to the state police or the FBI, or if you could just very briefly talk. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for coming and asking the question. As far as the police department goes, if there is, and we've done it very, very recently, I can tell you within the last week, if there is an issue with a firearm at a home, or somebody that we think might be on edge, I as chief in Massachusetts can immediately revoke their license to carry a firearm and seize all their firearms. I have done that. I can tell you I've done that as recently as in the last week. So that is where the communication comes in, and that is a component, what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about, is the component of people like you who brought that to the police department's attention, and immediately we were able to take that information and go to the house, identify the individual, go to the house, get them the mental health that they needed. And even though they weren't licensed to have a firearm, we seized all the firearms of the people that were licensed and took away their license to carry a firearm. I temporarily suspended it. Now, it falls upon me, but my lowest level sergeant can do these things. I have delegated that downward so that in the event that I am not there, there is always a sergeant on duty. They know, and they do that as a routine, routine thing if need be. I can simply unsuspend it if we deem everything safe, but we take it to the next level right away. And some of the things that happened in other areas of the country, I don't think would happen here. It doesn't mean they can't, but I think some of the mistakes that get made wouldn't be. I don't think that happen here. At least I'd like to think that. Also, the communication is the biggest part. It's the superintendent saying his familiar text, which to me is, "Do you got a sec?" He texts me, "Do you got a sec?" And I know that means, I call him right away, and it's something going on. And it can be the simplest thing, or it can be the most major thing, and it doesn't really matter. That communication piece that he and I share is invaluable, but more importantly than him and I are you people, because without, we got, 2 sets of eyes here, but you got, 16,000 people in this community who are seeing, and you need to be able to report and see things if you see something, to take an active role. And like I said earlier, last week, the individual that took the time to say, instead of saying, "It ain't my problem, it ain't my kid, it ain't my problem," they said, "Whoa, what's going on here?" and told us, and told the school. And that's invaluable. So, sorry. Yeah,
Thank you.
Did I answer it? Okay.
Another question?
I don't want to make you work too hard. Good evening, Chief Majensky, and thank you for your time very much.
Thank you.
Chris O'Neill, 70 Diane Circle. My question for you is,
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if it's the case, but do we have the SRO offices, do we have them funded through that grant?
We do. So you want to ask about the funding?
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to I didn't know if it was the case that it was funded.
It
Shame
is
on me not
funded.
doing my homework, but
Correctly,
through the state?
correct. It
Okay.
is funded up until August of 2018, but we still have additional monies left over because there were gaps in our, in when we had school resource officers, because we had people left. I'll ask for an extension on that. I see no reason to believe that we wouldn't. The town manager has supported a budget that going forward, we will have school resource officers going forward. Now, the debate is, do we want 1 school resource officers like most communities have, or do we want 2 school resource officers, or do we want 1 in every school? That's sort of a debate that's above my head, but it's certainly something that, you as citizens, and certainly the boards, the various boards you need to talk to, whether it be the school committee or the Board of Selectmen, need to voice your opinion. If you want 1 in every school, voice that. If you think it's okay to have 1, voice that. It's important and imperative for you to communicate that through your local, leaders.
But do we have the staffing for that? Because we have the funding in place, correct?
We have the
Do we have the
funding,
staffing?
and we have 2 school resource officers right now. We have 1 that is, we have 2 that are working full-time. I don't know that we're going to sustain that.
Are we able to pull from other communities? Is it like a detail pay? I'm not sure how it works.
No, it isn't a detail pay. I don't know that we need to pull from other communities right now. I have 2 officers who stepped up recently. They have less than a couple of years on, and they have shown me an interest in wanting to become involved in the schools. They are scheduled to go in July to the school resource officer school training. So, while I think in the future we will have more options, if that helps.
All right, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
From this guy, the more the better, so thank you.
Can I build on that just for a second? One of our goals would be to have consistency there with someone we get to know and gets to know us, knows the ins and outs of the personalities of our kids by name, and the children know the officer by name or the officers by name. So that's why having someone who is under, and then the communication with the rest of the police department, that's why someone who's under the control of the Abington Police Department is so critical to us, because that need for familiarity Because another part of this is, we want to build those positive relationships with the police department. We don't, our police officers protect and serve every single day, and it's healthy for our kids to see them in that light, rather than someone who shuffles them around town because they're, crowding Dunkin' Donuts or the House of Pizza. So.
We're hoping when we go like this, they don't duck, they high-five us.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask?
Please.
Hi, my name's Lisa Brown. I'm from Nash Memorial Road. My question is just if you've given any thought around the security in the schools in terms of just the entryway. I know that schools are locked, but after 9/11, you can't really get into any office building in Boston without showing an ID, but a lot of schools you can still walk in the door. So I'm just curious, and I know there's a lot on the secretaries to, monitor that, but just curious.
It's a good question. We're better in our newest building because of the locking mechanisms, but in each building, you have to check into the office, and you are right on that the majority of that responsibility for supervision of that falls on our secretaries, who take that very seriously, and it's stressful. I imagine quite a bit on them. They are truly the first warning that we get. You think about the layout of our different buildings. The Beaver Brook and the Woodsdale are not laid out as well. And so when those people buzz in, if they don't arrive at the office, the alerts begin, and the follow-up begins. And to go beyond that would require major reconfiguration and renovation of 2 buildings that, according to code, would need to be substantially renovated. We can't just get into those projects and begin. And we're talking, we actually did an estimate on a panic button system at the Woodsdale and the Beaver Brook, and the cost was so exorbitant it was going to cost us a lot of money just to find out what it would cost to put those in place. The asbestos in those buildings is encapsulated, and it's safe, and we do all those checks all the time, but all of the wiring and things in terms of the alarming would all need to be replaced in those buildings in order to do that work. And again, the asbestos is encapsulated. We do tests every single year to make sure it's safe, but once you get into a major renovation project in those buildings to do what you're describing, there's no cost to our safety, but those same dollars spent on the resource officer or an addition, or perhaps a social worker in town would be more bang, I believe, for our buck than in those buildings. That's my opinion. So.
And just to piggyback on that a little bit, one of the things that the SROs do, and I think the assistant superintendent and even the principal of the various schools will talk, is we go and check the doors, and we communicate, and we work with them to try to get best practices. The superintendent and his staff have been unbelievable in listening to what we have to say. If you went a year ago or 2 years ago to today, it was so much easier to get into a school system. Not to say that you can't do it, but it's so much more difficult now. And when I talk about working together, one of the biggest issues that we see our SROs work with is kids letting other kids in. That's the biggest deal. If you can, as parents, and I know that the educators, along with our SROs, kids knowing, hey, Johnny, hey, come on in, I'm late for class, and letting them in. They think nothing of it because it's Johnny. But that's kind of one of the biggest issues that we can all work together. If you can if you can talk to your kids and say, listen, I know you know Johnny, and I know they live next door, but Johnny's got to go around through and check in like everybody else, because there was an issue that we watched and that was corrected in kids letting other kids in, and it's through the work of all the teachers at these schools, along with the SROs, working together to kind of combat that. But more importantly, it's just educating the students, and if you can do that, it's invaluable.
I've actually, believe it or not, had suspension appeals on repeat offenders for opening doors a couple years ago for other kids, because kids get warnings and then they end up with a detention, and our administration follows up on those things.
Yeah, they do.
And eventually it becomes a serious disciplinary issue when you're obviously a repeat offender of opening doors for other people, even though it may be somebody, your best friend.
Right.
We tell them all the time, but it's one of those things we have to revisit all the time.
That's good.
Do we have any other questions?
Please.
Good evening.
evening.
Laura Zimmerman. I live at 31 Old Farm Road. Just a question in terms of, is there a particular schedule that's allocated to the SROs in terms of the 3 different schools? Like, I guess what I'm getting at is the majority of the time spent at this new school, the high school and the middle school, or do they also allocate a specific amount of time for the 2 elementary schools as well?
To answer your question, that's a great question. We try to work Monday through Friday to the school schedule, number one, so we get the maximum use. Typical police officers work 4 on 2 off. It's a rotating schedule. The SROs, we try to have Monday through Friday, just so it mirrors the school day. The majority of time spent is here at the middle school and the high school. It really is. We try to make it down. We're trying to get a little bit better on visiting some of the other schools. I know the deputy chief and I, along with the lieutenant, are trying to get out ourselves when we have coffee just to walk through some of the schools, but it's something that we're trying to get better at. And it's an issue that we saw that was problematic. So we're certainly trying to get to the other schools, but the majority of our time is spent here at this particular school, if that answers your question.
We've also requested presence at the dances, especially at the secondary level, and events like that, prom-type events. And, with kids, drinking and drugs and the issues of our society, there's a whole other list of things we worry about with our kids, other than probably what's brought most people here tonight. And the presence of a police officer in uniform at those events is also another stretch, but something that we're getting help with covering.
Another question?
Hi, Jackie Abrams, Colonial Road. Thanks for coming out. My question is similar to Mara's question, but instead of schedules, I'm learning some new things tonight. So to be compliant with the grant,
Right.
You mentioned that they're not here. They don't have to be to the school. Both officers don't need to be assigned to the schools all the time.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because
Sure.
I guess I'm thinking forward into the future where you said 1 versus 2.
Right.
Would it be better off for the town in the future to have 1, if so, would that 1 be assigned full-time to the schools versus split where we have 2? I hope that makes sense.
Yep, no, it makes perfect sense. So it's 75%, if you can, overall, 75% of the time needs to be spent in the school district. We have 2 officers, one's full-time, one's a little bit better than half-time. So you are getting at least 1 officer there full-time all the time. The other one you're getting half-time, but then a lot of the time you're getting, well, right now you're getting them full-time, both of them, but I think a lot of the times they're at night, they're following up. So there are times when you don't see a school resource officer, but they are following up on an incident that might have taken place during the school day. As far as 1 or 2, that's really a policy decision. If you want to know me as a police chief, I'm going to want it all. I'd like 1 in every school. I'd like 2 in this school, 1 on the middle side, 1 in the high school, 1 at the Beaverbrook. He knows what I was going to say. I mess it up all the time. I want to say Eager Beaver because of the day camp. Beaverbrook, and then 1 at the Woodsdale. I mean, that would be my preference, but I don't know that that's realistic, and I also don't know that that's what most school districts are doing. So it's a matter of policy of where you as residents, want, how much, presence you want there, or how much presence you think is needed. That's, so if that answers your question, I don't know if it does. Did I not?
Struggle because the building relationship part is what we keep hearing about, but if
I
they're
know.
working at night on all the other bits that
Right.
go along with that, you're not getting
Correct.
proactive relationship building, so it's hard
Right.
to get an officer that is in the schools on a schedule, kind of like you described.
If you really want to build relationships, and you would assign an officer to each school, you would have one for each school, and then that would be your person. And if you were looking for an answer on something, you would have that officer who would be assigned to that school. You'd know Monday through Friday, unless they're at court or some other reason, they would be there on vacation or sick or whatever else, but they would be there. Ultimately, if you really want to build relationships, it comes down to resources. And, you know, and resources comes down to money and how much, you know, we want to expend to do that. I'm all for relationships. I'm all for taking ownership, each school having ownership of its own school resource officer. I think that'd be great. I think for, you know, Beaver Brook or Woodsdale or the middle school or the high school to each say, you know, Officer X is my school resource officer, and he's better than your school resource officer over in the Woodsdale, or whatever it might be. I think, and as parents, it's nice to know that when you pick up the phone, Officer Jones, he's my person. And so, but it comes down to resources. So it's hard.
We've heard a lot of answers revolving around money and finances, and I think we have one person here in the hall who would like to have some input in that matter, our town manager.
That really wasn't my point, Kathy, when I asked to speak for a moment, but Rick LaFawn, town manager, and I want to thank you, Peter and Dave. I think you're being very helpful tonight, but one of the things I did want to raise is that one of the issues in the 4+ years I've been here is one of the staffing priorities has been, well, the primary staffing priority has been to build up the staffing in the police department, which is what we have done. And we are still a couple positions shy of the high water mark approximately, I think, 20 years ago of the staffing in the police department. And we do have a couple members of the board here tonight, and I think they can tell you that has been the priority, Mr. Bezanson and Mr. Conley. And that's going to continue in this budget that begins July 1. To go to the question the gentleman asked a little bit earlier, the positions that were grant funded are fully funded in next year's proposed budget, which we presume will be supported by the town. How those positions are deployed, obviously, does have to do with the what people believe and what the police chief's needs are next year. Obviously, there will be at least one SRO, if not 1.5 SROs. But one of the points I'd like to bring up is that, and please, and I do invite you to correct me if you think I'm wrong, both Mr. Majensky and Mr. Schaefer, is because we've had, as you can imagine, many conversations in the chief's office with regard to the role of a school resource officer. And a school resource officer is really a coordinator to a great extent of the resources between the school and the police department. You know, it's not, he or she is not an armed guard at a police, at a school. Obviously, that person is available to provide safety if necessary. But as you've heard to some extent, that's a person that really coordinates a lot of the activities between those agencies. And yes, you'd like to have as many as possible to some extent, but the resources of the police department does not extend simply to the school resource officer. The men and women of the police department are available to assist and serve the school department, from the first person in the department all the way down the ranks as needed. And I think that happens 24/7. The school resource officer, whether it's one person, which, as you've heard, is really the norm for departments in towns of this size, is really a very critical coordination position. But the individuals that investigate and deal with parents and administrators of the school system, that goes on 24/7. When there are issues and incidences at the school, it's not just the school resource officer that deals with those. There are, whether that's, that's multiple police officers any time of the day at night. So, I wouldn't want people to think that the requirements of the school department are simply met by a single school resource officer or two school resource officers. Whatever the requirements of the school department are met by the police department, whether that's whoever's on duty or if it's people that have to be called in on duty to help at any given time, day or night. That's what it takes. Then that's what it takes. And I think that's, you wouldn't disagree with that, would you, Mr.?
No, that's absolutely, absolutely accurate. If the school resource officer isn't available, of course, a police officer would pick up the investigation. So
And
absolutely true.
The presence that may be seen here at this facility or other schools, whether it's before or during or after, that's not necessarily just the school resource officer either. There are other officers from throughout the day or night that, not just the school resource officer. So it's not simply a school resource officer that's serving the community and the school systems at any given time. So as much as school resource officers are a very important piece of serving the needs of the school system, it's a lot more than that goes into serving the needs of the school system. So I'm not trying to downplay the importance at all, but I don't want people to think that's all that serves this school community. That's not the case at all. It's much more. It's really the entire department, both from the administration down, that serves the needs of the school community. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Troy Wood, Savine Street. I guess in talking about having an SRO at each physical school location, is that something that's you see going that way in the future with schools across the country, the common practice? I know what necessarily applies to other schools doesn't necessarily apply to us, but is it something that's going in that direction? I'd hate to think of the response time with a single officer at one school and something happening at another location, how long it would take for somebody to get over there.
Right.
Situations like that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I don't know where the funding is going to come, if the president is going to open up funding and make that a priority amongst other communities. But I think the progressive way that we're doing business right now, which is we have offices on all the shifts, whether it be the midnight to 8, the 4 to 12, the 8 to 4 shift, routinely just check in to the school system, walk through. I think it's becoming relatively, it's my thought, and it's funny, I've had staff meetings on this. I said, I don't want this to be a week-long thing, a 2-week-long thing, a month thing. I want to make this much like we do on critical asset checks on our infrastructure, or when somebody goes away on vacation, we check their home. I want to make that part of our daily routine. So I think that's the wave of the future. I think for the quickest response time in the event of emergency, to have a school resource officer in the school is obviously optimum, is the best. But certainly to get everybody involved, as the town manager had mentioned, walking through the school, reporting to the school on a random basis is important too. So I don't know if I answered your question there. I sort of walked around it a little bit, but in a perfect world, I'd love to have a school resource officer in every school, but I don't know that that's reality. And I don't know if that's the wave of the future. We'll have to see. I don't know the funding,
Thank you, Kathy. Rich Testa, Presidential Drive. First question, what's the name of the full-time SRO that we see present at this building, typically?
We have Officer Lynch and Officer Koukouris.
I believe it's Officer Lynch. He should be commended.
Thank you.
When I watch him engage with the students, He's extremely engaging. He participates with the students, and I think he's a tremendous resource.
I appreciate that.
No problem.
That's good feedback. Thank you.
With that said, I have a couple of questions. One, recognizing the amount of training that you've talked about over the past several years that that you've participated in, but also recognizing the amount of turnover that you've spoken about and the number of vacancies that you have presently. So, while I think all of that training is great, if we're constantly churning over offices, the amount of hours that we're investing in that training is lost on those offices as they leave. With that, if we do as a town vote to fund SRO positions, recognizing the importance of those roles, how do we ensure that those are dedicated resources that are functioning in the SRO capacity? You spoke about 2 vacancies that you have presently, and I can understand the strain that that must place on you, on the budget, on overtime. But with that said, if the town does decide that we want to fund SROs specific for that role, how do we ensure that they function in that role and they're not pulled in other directions to fill the number of vacancies that you already have?
It's a great question, and the non-political answer would be, I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that people will stay. I can't guarantee that people won't go to other agencies. I can't guarantee that, you know, that they won't take the training and leave. Officers have done it in the past. They'll continue to do it, and, you know, they'll do it in the future. That's the straightforward answer. Well, go ahead.
If the town votes to fund SROs, that those are the best capacity that they serve.
If the town votes to have SROs and is particular in that and says, listen, this is it. If you lose offices, we're not losing the SROs. If that is the agreement that the town makes, I, as police chief, will stick by it.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Ann Boyle Olson. This is more on the administrative side. I was listening about opening doors and the kids being told not to do that. And there was also, I look at my children's emails from school because I get a lot of information from them. And there was also something on there about earbuds and about opening doors. My question is not so much having officers, but as the school administration, is there more, could we do more communicating with parents the same way as we do with the students? I find that the communication with students is excellent. That's why I read them. And I have my son's permission to do that. But I would really love to see what's being said here sent to me. You know, just for us as parents to help you be on the same page, and as long with the police officers as well. And that's my first question, is I was just wondering if maybe the school administration could you know, think about how communicating with parents would be more helpful, so we can talk to our kids, so we can all be on the same page. So at home I can say, hey, listen, don't open those doors. You know, and that's one of my questions. And my second question is this, is also to the administration, is I know this sounds very Nazi not, you know, this sounds very hardcore, but I've been thinking about this week, and I've been thinking about badges at the administration end. We're such a small community, we all know each other. So it's very easy for a parent like me to open the door for somebody. And maybe it's important for parents to be reminded, you know, we really shouldn't be opening doors for each other. That we all need to go to the office, you know, maybe we need badges. I mean, maybe even to the point of you know, I'd be willing to turn in my driver's license to the school. If I was, you know, volunteering my time or, you know, coming through the school, I'd be more than willing to do that. I'd be more than willing to wear a badge and identify myself in the halls. And I was wondering if there was any kind of conversation regarding safety issues within the school that can also help. And if Chief McGrath, if you agree with this and think that would be as helpful too, I'm nervous.
It's good.
Well, although you're nervous, you did a great job. Thank you. Communicating with our parents, well, first of all, we have good kids. So we're always going to get kids that test us, and there's always going to be kids to remind not to open doors, and we'll do that. And in terms of communicating with parents, you know, we want to continue to do a better and better job with that. And thank you for reading what's going on in the life of your child. I wish everybody did that. And then in terms of badges, I myself am guilty of not wearing my badge. And I, you know, I wore it tonight, so what? You know, you guys aren't worried about me here tonight. I have to wear it during the school day. Those check-in procedures that we have with people, we do talk about, continue to review, and we will continue to improve. And I will tell you that they're just full disclosure. We are better after what happened, the horrific events that happened in Florida, than we were before, because those were terrible reminders that we have to be vigilant again. And we will continue to do that.
I think part of her question was also about volunteers coming into the school in a badge in that capacity, and I think you could address that as well.
I will, let me just speak to that if you don't mind, Superintendent. I have a badge ID system that a grant that I wrote years ago. We have the ability, I'd certainly offer it to the school. I'm not sure if you guys have your own system. I have one that we could certainly work towards that. That makes sense to me. And certainly I would have our computer whiz or your computer whiz to make them up and put them on lanyards. That makes perfect sense.
We currently have a sign-in process in the buildings that everybody's probably experienced. That doesn't mean that couldn't be improved with ID checks. The problem is that we don't have the ability or the staffing to check all of the IDs and then get the background piece. Some buildings you walk in have a kiosk and you give them your driver's license and it reads it, and then it actually kind of does a background check that most people don't know about when you sign into the building. I don't know if the grant has the ability to do that.
I don't have that. I don't have that kind of technology, but I can make up an ID. It's a great way to. I think it's a great idea. I think it's something we maybe will talk about, but I think it's certainly would be a good system to make it so that you leave your license. I wonder if some people won't be aggravated by that, but I think it's a great idea, honestly. Understood. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your suggestion.
Kathy, we have an administrator in the.
I'm not running that far.
What Terry's saying is the message that went out to students about wearing earbuds in the hallway because it's unsafe because they can't hear alarms. That message did also go out to parents. Oh. Oh.
Ian, you couldn't read it? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, I got it and I could read it, so yeah. No, but I agree. I think we are struggling with earbuds. So anyhow, that's why it was sent. Any help parents could give to support, the kids not wearing them in the halls so they can hear emergency announcements. Yeah. Thank you. Is anybody else experiencing black constant contact messages coming out? Just want to know if it's, okay, thank you.
As long as we're on Facebook pages, as long as, while Kathy's moving through the auditorium, we went live with the central office one that has needed to go live to work out the bugs. We'll have information from the high school and the other school buildings feeding the district-wide page. Right now, for some reason, it's only pulling the high school information, and so it's dominating the Facebook page. But we'll start spooling things from all the schools just as soon as we work out the bugs.
Hi, Katie Williamson, 238 Park Ave. It sounds like you guys are taking a lot of steps to prevent this from ever happening, which is, it's great, and we all appreciate it, and hopefully we never have to worry about it. But in the event that, like you said, you can't always predict how a kid is going to react. So if a child does have a weapon and is going to get into this school, it's probably fairly easy for them to do that. Have you discussed measures or protocols to prevent that from happening? I noticed when I drop off my daughter, I guess I'm specifically talking about this school, because I feel like it's more of a middle school, high school. Not that it can't happen in elementary school, but as far as the kids being the culprit themselves, when I drop off my daughter in the morning, they come in and they go into school. There's a couple of staff members just watching them. Are they trained at all to look for something, or children that have music instruments or big bags that they could put something in there? Is there something that you've ever talked about to prevent that from happening?
Just as recently as in this last month, the chief and the deputy chief made the suggestion that those entrances to school in the morning are supervised by people keeping an eye, and those points of entry and those people also have direct communications in the event that they see something to help supervise that entrance, and then following that, everything's locked up. So those entrances to school are supervised the way that you described, with enhanced communication for reporting purposes. It was actually the suggestion of the police department.
And if I just could expand on that just a little bit, I'm going to steal something from my deputy chief, who said, we were having a meeting and we were discussing safety, and he said, what's the happiest place on earth? And I looked at him kind of funny, and he said, well, what's the happiest place on earth? And he said, I go, I don't know, what's the happiest place on earth? He goes, Disney World. I go, okay, what does that have to do with school safety? He goes, do you go through Disney World without being checked, without having your bags checked, without getting wanded? That's a policy decision that we need to talk about at some point, and certainly, we could put people through metal detectors, we could search, we could do all those things. You're giving up rights. I don't know that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I can tell you, if you go into Disney World, you get your bag searched. They don't care if I'm a police chief or who I am. They're going to search my bag. We could do that at a school district. I don't know that we need to do it, but it's a policy that, if people, want to explore it, they certainly can. But it's a matter of how many rights you want to give up, and the cost, not the cost benefit, that's because that's not really, appropriate, but the cost of how much freedom you want to give up, and then how much of a delay. Your school year is going to have, or your school day is going to have to start earlier, because you're going to have to get, more staffing, more people to check, and is it money well spent, or is it time well spent? So, that's.
Hi, Kristen Tikhonov, Center Ave. I just had an observation. Are the doors at Woodsdale and Beaverbrook, are they purposely slow closing doors? Because I know when I go to the office or bring something for my child, the OCD in me turns around and pushes that door to make sure it clicks and locks. And I even pull the handle like 4 or 5 times to make sure it's locked. It seems like such an easy thing that door is, sometimes I'll walk to my car and get in and that door's still pretty open. And I'm just curious about the safety of that.
They're not slow closing. They've actually been, updated, because the challenge that we always have is how do you keep the weather out with enough weather stripping and yet have the door close when you walk away? All the doors have to close and lock. Like you walk away, that door should lock behind you. I know it takes a while, but it should lock behind you. We have to check that all the time, because weather stripping changes and things like that. But so they are checked so that when you let go, they close freely and then latch. But we haven't tried to get them to speed up. Those are actually newer doors. We just updated them so they would latch behind people when they left.
Okay. And I just wanted to know, what steps do you take after an event like tonight where, I mean, there's probably 85 people, I don't know, but even if there were more or less, do you check the building to see if, I mean, when you're having a public meeting, kids know about it, parents know about it, just to make sure that nothing inappropriate or unsafe is left behind by members of the public, whether on purpose or accidentally?
We have custodians here into the evening, but at some point they will go home. And if somebody was intent on taking something that looked like a shopping bag and leaving it someplace, it could potentially set someplace, if that's what you're talking about. We do look for the things that don't look like they belong, but that's not to say that someone with an intention of being a terrible human being and creating carnage, we're vulnerable as schoolhouses. That's what keeps us reviewing things. Something that happens after this meeting is us reviewing everything we've talked about, but we would do that anyway. But in terms of checking the building, if someone were intent on doing harm to us, they could with something that sneaky, if that's what you mean.
I just thought about it. I mean, sometimes it can happen by accident, or some people do carry a weapon and you don't know it. So I just wanted to know if there are any steps after events, whether it's a school dance or a parent event or anything, a musical.
Well, something that somebody carries a weapon, it looks like a weapon, obviously that would be identified very quickly. I was more thinking if someone were trying to be sneaky and leave some device someplace.
Both, I guess. Yeah.
So obviously, one that is identifiable is a lot faster. We'd pick up on it than something that was hidden.
Okay. Is there anyone else that has a question?
Teresa Noble, 711 3rd Street. My question is, could you speak to the policy on bullying that currently is in place in the schools, as far as children being assaulted, special needs children being assaulted, kids recording it in the classroom on their phones? I mean, what is the policy on anti-bullying? Is it, I'm not a good public speaker either, I get nervous, so I'm sorry. But
you're doing great.
I just kind of want to know, like, where the school stands on those type of incidents. And because a lot of times if someone is a student disturbed by being bullied by other students their whole life, those are the ones we have to watch out for. So what does the school department have in place, and the police, for bullying protocol and punishment, or basically can you elaborate on it for me?
Yeah, and each case is different. It is, obviously bullying exists. It exists everywhere. Thinking that it doesn't means that it's going on and you're not paying attention to it. And it's any information that we can get our hands on is investigated. There are multiple approaches to it that include the administration and a discipline component, and then also a counseling component for both the person who was the victim and the person who is the offender, so that we can change the behavior of the person who offends and then support the victim. When they rise to the occasion of anything that's a reportable act, we report it to the police department.
Does that answer your question? Does anyone else have a question that they want to have answered?
Beth Owings, Pond Street. I have a couple things here, so bear with me. One of the first things that I wanted to ask, specifically the chief, is as far as like the department trainings that you had mentioned, I was actually going to basically reiterate what a gentleman over here had said, was you're going back to 2010. I mean, those are like 8 years ago, and those trainings are great, but whereas you've had almost what seems like a 75%, probably more turnover, what trainings are you currently doing for the officers that you currently have? And then also, what are you doing as the chief of police to foster an environment that is going to deter officers from wanting to leave or looking for placements in other departments? Because if we have a department that is seasoned and the officers stay, I mean, obviously it's more cost effective, it's more effective for the community as a whole. So I just want to know what things you were able to do or what are you doing to foster that kind of environment?
Thank you, Beth. To answer your first question, which would be training, we have training coming up in April. So we're going to be doing live simulation training during April vacation. As far as fostering, getting people to stay, there's a lot of factors that are involved in that. It's not an easy question. It's not really a question that I could answer in one or two simple words. There's a lot of different reasons people leave. Sometimes it's monetary. Sometimes it's they don't agree with the community policing philosophy. Sometimes it's disciplinary, that they leave because they were disciplined. There's a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they just want a different agency. They don't want to work where they grew up in the town. Sometimes they don't agree with my philosophy, which is community partnerships. So we're doing the best we can. Certainly the Board of Selectmen has been working on making the police department a priority as far as staffing goes and as far as a monetary to keep them in line with what other departments pay. I think that's an issue, and I think it's an important issue, and I think that the town manager and the Board of Selectmen are very much understand that and are trying to correct that as much as humanly possible.
Okay. When was the last time that you had an ALICE training here in this school?
So there are 7 members of the police department that are ALICE certified trainers, and all of the administration. We were beginning the ALICE training rollout prior to Parkland. We talked about as administrative team the beginning of this year. We were going to do it for next year, and we've sped up that process since what happened in Parkland. We went to these trainings they trained us how to train people in ALICE. And so we have to create, as I described, an emergency plan that includes ALICE, which is a switch for us. We have to do an online learning component with all of our faculty. There'll be PowerPoint presentations and a classroom piece for our faculty. Then we will, in the next half day for, pending the school committee approval. The school committee wants this very much also, so I know that I'm confident they're going to approve it. Then the following half day we'll do scenario training in cooperation with the police department. And then we'll do an evening for parents. And then we will train our students this year.
Okay, so is that something that you're trying to get accomplished, like the actual ALICE training will happen before the end of this school year?
Yes.
Okay. Another question that I had was as far as like the police department's presence in like community coalitions. I work for a pretty large human service agency in Brockton. I'm an Abington resident, and I'm on multiple coalition throughout the community, Avon, ACES, the Brockton area opioid overdose prevention group, EB Hope. And I have noticed as an Abington resident in working at those that Abington kind of seemed like it was absent. I had to kind of dig for information as to, did we even have 2 officers that were responding to overdose calls? Who were those officers?
Sure.
So I wanted to see or find out what the reason was that there's kind of an absence of Abington and like the Abington Substance Abuse Coalition. The fire chief has attended, but we'd love to see you, Chief Majensky.
To answer that question, I sit on the board of advisors for the Plymouth County Outreach. What we do is when there is we have 3 officers that go when there's an overdose. They go with a coach, meaning a life coach.
Recovery coach.
Recovery coach. They go with, they go in plain clothes so that not to create more of an issue. And we work with trying to get them treatment. So when you overdose in Abington, within 24 to 48 hours, there is a police officer that goes to your residence along with the recovery coach and tries to get you the help that you need. So we are very much involved in that. I actually sit on the board of there's 10 police chiefs in Plymouth County. The entire county is part of this coalition, and I think we do a pretty good job of that.
When you had mentioned possibly having access to like a mental health professional that can help somebody as far as like getting resources and things like that, the officers that are responding to the overdose calls, EB Hope is the first and third Thursday of every month. They could go there and actually get contacts, make contacts with community providers that could actually give those services.
We're part of EB Hope. That coalition is part of EB Hope.
No, I understand that. I understand that. But I'm saying as far as like wanting to have a mental health professional, you don't really need a mental health professional if the officers have, a pretty simple list of agencies that they can refer to or contact.
I think that's a great point.
Just offering
it really
as a
No,
suggestion.
it really is. It's a great point, and we do have those resources that we list, but as you know, trying to get people to pick up the phone and follow up and help them help themselves is difficult. So I really do think it would be a progressive way, and I don't know if you agree or disagree, that if we were to take that extra step and visit that home and try to offer those people help even after the call, a little bit more of a proactive approach, I think that'd be helpful. That's my opinion.
I'm going to agree to disagree on that one. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
All right, is there anyone else that has a question, comment?
Thank you. I didn't know, are there cameras in the school and are they linked to the police department? And are you able to monitor during the day and are they all properly working? I don't have any knowledge of that, so I'm...
Yeah, that is an excellent question. To answer your question, yes. But I don't want to get into it too much. But one of the things that I am hoping that gets passed at town meeting is a dedicated line that'll give us a little bit more access into some of the, a little bit more in-depth of the camera systems. But yes, we do have links. It could be better. It could be better, and we're working towards that. I'm hoping that you'll see an article in the upcoming town meeting, and it's going to be a substantial article. It's probably right around $80,000 or $90,000. That's a dedicated line that would just give us the ability to monitor more, because it takes up so much space. We just need something a little bit better. Yeah. Yes, we can see certain areas of the school, yes. And the dispatch right now, as we speak, has access to certain areas of the school that they are monitoring directly into the cameras. What I'm trying to say is I want to expand it to, there's 200 cameras in here.
Melissa Henry, 104 Hancock Street. I actually just have a quick question. We were talking about recess or the protocol if there was an issue in the school. And I know the staffing can be an issue. If there's 2 teachers outside with all of those kids and something were to happen, is there a protocol for, gym or recess outside when there's so many children, to one teacher or 2 teachers?
They have direct communication with the office so that they can get the cavalry, and then it's to come inside if something's happening outside. And if something's happening inside, part of the Alice will be you don't want to go in harm's way. Would create a rally point for those students.
Just as an add-on, one of the other things that the school district has is a radio systems, portable radio systems with our own school frequency, where members of the superintendent's staff, the principal's staff, can communicate directly with dispatch via radio on a frequency that's not the police department's directly, but it is dedicated to the school. So it's helpful. Our school resource officers can monitor it, our desk officers can monitor it, and there are portables in the various staff members that would instantaneous, so we didn't even have to pick up a phone at that point. If you have a radio, they can call us direct and get dispatched direct on a dedicated school frequency.
I'm always hesitant to share those, I'll call them tactical aspects, but he's the chief of police and he can tell you anything he wants about that stuff. You know, the cameras we have chew up bandwidth, and so the images, that's the article at town meeting to improve that, those images, and then the radio communications, as the chief has described, are there also. But again, those are enhancements that help improve safety.
That $100,000, is that a one-time fee?
Yes.
It is.
The only caveat with that, with the $100,000, is that, you know, in the event that a line breaks, the town's got to pay for it. But, you know, if there's an accident, somebody hits a pole, hopefully the town would have the resources to go through the insurance companies to, you know, if the individual hits a pole or if there's something. There is an upkeep. It should be a one-time cost, yes, but just know that, like anything, if the line breaks, we'd have to repair it. So that's the only. Yeah. No, it is not an annual expense. It's a one-time. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Troy started round two, not me. All right. I just want to get something, or help me understand. We keep hearing about funding an SRO officer, but if I'm not mistaken, they're already funded. Is that correct?
That is correct.
We have 2 of them funded, so it's not really a funding issue. It's a resource issue. Is that's all. I'm just, and I wouldn't want to have to deal with having a depleted force. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it keeps coming up, like if we throw some more money at this, we're going to have an armed police officer at the school. That's not the case. We are funding it.
It depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for, see, the discussion that we're going to have going forward when this grant ends is we'll have funding for 2 police officers. One of them will be a school resource officer, maybe 2, maybe 1.5. That's a discussion that we need to have. Or is it better suited to put another detective, to put a detective on? It's a discussion that it's hard to answer, but I think the question earlier was, if you were to dedicate a town meeting and say, we want to fund 4 police officers that are school resource officers and that only, while I have the right of assignment, the question was, would you dedicate them? And my answer is, as your police chief, if that's what you told me at town meeting, I would live by what you told me at town meeting.
Okay.
I
appreciate that.
Okay.
The state funding we're getting now, we have a grant that is funding 2 SRO officers.
Correct.
Dedicated money for that.
Correct.
But we are not filling it.
We're not what?
Are we filling those 2 SRO?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That was my question. Thank you.
Hi, Denise Giller, Springwood Drive. I just had a question, Mr. Schaefer. You said about teaching the kids to shut the doors behind them. How is that, or to not open doors for people? I have a 6th grader that would totally open the door for somebody if they looked nice enough or not carrying a gun. So how are you teaching them? I haven't had this conversation at home, which I will tomorrow morning. But how are you teaching them to shut doors behind them and to not open doors, or if you see a backpack left unattended, how do they know who to go to? How do they know the steps? I mean, and for all grades, from, I have a middle schooler and an elementary school. How does my 1st grader know who to tell?
So the doors should close behind them. We're not telling kids to shut the doors because the doors should be closing and locking after you go out a door. We're telling them not to open the doors, and that depends on grade level. So a 1st grader really doesn't have the opportunity to open a door for someone, and then that progresses up till you've got, juniors and seniors that are running out to asking permission to go out to their car. Of course, no one would ever go out to their car without permission, but should they do that, then they're told you can't do that, and then they're the other high school students, again, as you go down through the system, 6th graders also probably don't get much of an opportunity to open the door for someone from the outside. It's more of our high school students that would do that. We're just telling them not to. We're asking them not to. When they do it and we see them doing it, we tell them not to do it again. If you become a repeat offender, then it becomes more of an issue, and it becomes something that somebody could get a detention about. And honestly, once upon a time, we had a student that was suspended. They opened the door so many darn times for their friends, their parents appealed the suspension to me. And no, you're compromising the safety of everyone else. You have to not open doors for people anymore. Did I answer the question? Missing things that shouldn't be left behind too. You asked about that. How do our kids know? I mean, I would say that if anyone in the school community saw something that was obviously a dangerous item, kids know to tell people about those things. But if it's just a backpack, I hope no one who wants to do harm to us is watching. But if it's just a school backpack like the other, or music instrument case, or a lunch box that somebody carries a lunch in, I mean, we have thousands of those. Right.
You know what I mean? So just so that kids are aware that it's an ongoing conversation
Yep.
in the school. Now I'm going to know that we have at home, but that the kids are aware. I know it's scary, but you have to
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's a great point, and certainly this is the kind of forum that hopefully we can get people that are watching to talk about it and have that conversation that maybe they wouldn't normally have, and say, hey, listen, if you see something, say something. I know it sounds cliche, but it's the truth, especially if it seems out of place.
It was one of the reasons we had hoped to have a psychologist here today, was to give you some pointers on how to have those conversations with your children. And we're sorry that that piece of our program is missing.
Hi, Inga Ross from Checkerberry Road. My question is, what happens after school at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, when your child has to come back to school to practice and they're trying to get in? They have to be let in. So what's the procedure for that?
It depends on the grade level, depends on the activity. This is an active place in the afternoons with kids coming in and out for sports and music instruments and rehearsals and drama club. And so that would depend on which door, what time, what event. There are all different timings of security that click in. So after dismissal and there aren't kids here anymore, it's less, and then it ramps up as you get into the evening. But at the same time, we have kids returning from sporting events or activities from other towns that need to get into the locker room. So it's an ongoing, busy, active place. It's why having 250 cameras that record everything are healthy for us, and having a custodial staff that's chasing around after us who are really part of a first line of security as a custodial staff, making sure doors are locked and not propped or things are not left behind. So I don't have a solid answer for you because it depends on the event, the time, the door, and the need.
And I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight and for your careful questions. If there's anyone that still has something that they feel uncomfortable about, if they want to speak to Superintendent Schaefer or Chief Majensky, they'll both be here for a little while after this. And I'm sure they'll be happy to take any questions that you might have if you prefer to discuss something on a more personal nature. Thank you for bearing with me as I ran around the building. We felt it would be more comfortable for people asking questions from their seat rather than asking you to come down front and use the microphone. But we're pleased that so many of you came to avail yourselves of this information tonight, and thank you very much.